You see that bum buckler, little boy, the name Molly Dang. I do it, you know.
Jano, me run out too much run out. Kind of too excited.
Yeah.
Run out and ring me foot.
Jaja.
Oi, when me dey see the foot big like mama blood not pumpkin. The foot swell pan me pants. So me have to perform. I'm billion the DJ anywhere. Me work through by and come here and shoes there, you know. Well, want to take off car. You have to hold the hype up on stage. But anyway, you see what I go on, you know. And anyway, me take time limp and come up like a soldier. Because when you come up, you can't make them look in your car. You don't know your part. And some come off, like, nothing no go on. You see, by the time I reach back, see, becomes a fly off the boat. Foot swell, so, you know.
Young thing.
Yo, the foot swell, you know. Remember, me can't move, you know. You see, if I fly out the next morning, who you think I'll have my suitcase and I push me in a wheelchair? The teacher.
Jaja.
The teacher. Yeah, the teacher.
Superstar, help superstar.
The teacher, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And the journey continue. Enough people probably, you see the teacher is a very mystic person, you know. He's a very mystic person. The teacher could have lose his life in an accident. Yeah, man. Crash bad. Yeah. We have to rush him to the hospital and put him in a bully for people. No. You understand me? And the van, nice to go van when I drive. Yeah, I thought they could just change the van. And I thought them, no, we change the van. Could I lose because we don't like excitement.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Daily Scoop. If this is your first time here, you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and make sure you stay locked in because we have a lot to unpack today. Now, people, today's discussion is bringing together Alkaline, Vybz Kartel, Conscience, Twins of Twins, Bounty Killer, Beanie Man, Mavado, Sean Paul, and several other important names that is connected to the story of Jamaican dancehall. And trust me, this is not just another video where we are going to jump from one headline to another. Today, we are going to look at the journey. We are going to talk about where some of these artists came from, the people who helped them along the way, the discussions that shaped their careers, and why certain names continue to dominate conversation about the Jamaican music industry. So guys, we are also going to spend some serious time talking about Vybz Kartel, not just Vybz Kartel the superstar, but Vybz Kartel before the fame, the young artist, the songwriter, the performer, the person who was still trying to find his place in the industry. Because sometimes people see the superstar at the top and forgot that every superstar had to start somewhere in life. Now let's start off with one of the biggest talking points coming out of this discussion, which is Alkaline. The Vendetta boss recently sat down for an interview on the Just Buzz platform, and based on the conversation, this was not one of those interviews where the artist came out looking for controversy. Instead of fans got an opportunity to hear Alkaline speak about his career, his experience, his performance, and his perspective on where he is at this stage of his journey. And one of the interesting moments basically came out when the conversation turned toward the huge crowd that showed up for one of his performances. The interviewer referenced a massive turnout with a figure of around 100,000 people being mentioned. So now Alkaline himself did not appear overly concerned about putting an exact number on it. His attitude was basically, whatever the actual number was, the response from the people was incredible. And honestly, that is something worth paying attention to, because when an artist reaches a point where they don't have to constantly explain themselves, they can simply step onto a stage and let the audience reaction speak for themselves. That is a different level of confidence, and we see that from Alkaline. Alkaline has always operated differently from many artists in dancehall. From the beginning of his career, there was a very deliberate image surrounding him. He was not necessarily the artist who was going to give everybody every detail about his personal life. He was not always looking for the loudest interview, and he certainly was not interested in explaining every move that he made. Instead, much of his career has been built around the music, the visuals, the performance, and the vendetta identity. And whether you are a fan of Alkaline or not, you have to basically acknowledge that this approach created a very recognizable brand that is important in modern music, because an artist is not only selling songs anymore, an artist is building his identity as well. And Alkaline understood that very early. One thing that stood out to me from this interview is the idea that an artist eventually reaches a stage where they have become comfortable with being themselves. And that is particularly interesting when you are talking about somebody like Alkaline. The dancehall industry can be extremely competitive. Artists are constantly being compared. Fans want to know who is number one, who has the biggest song, who has the biggest concert, who has the strongest fan base, who is making the most money, and who is influencing the younger generation. And sometimes artists can become so focused on those comparisons that they forget to develop their own identity. Alkaline career shows a different approach. Build your own audience, build your own sound, build your own visual identity, build your own relationship with your supporters, then all the numbers and the performance to tell the story. And that is why the Vendetta Boss himself movement became such an important part of his career. It was not simply about one song, it became a community around an artist. And that is something every upcoming entertainer can learn from. You don't necessarily have to copy the person who is already successful. You have to figure out what makes you different. Because when everybody sounds the same, the person with the distinct identity automatically become easier to remember, and Alkaline certainly created a distinct identity for himself. Now, guys, let's move away from Alkaline a bit and talk about another interesting name mentioned in this discussion, which is Conscience. Conscience has been around dancehall for years, and one of the things I always find interesting when established artists recognize younger entertainer is the possibility of passing knowledge from one generation to another. And Conscience recently gave attention to Malan, a young artist who has been making moves. According to the discussion, Malan has been gaining attention with his music and recently released material connected to his Golden Boy project. One of the songs mentioned was already pulling significant views online at the time of the original discussion. Now, numbers can change quickly on YouTube. One day a song can have 80,000 views, and a few weeks later it could have hundreds of thousands or even millions views. But the bigger point is not necessarily the exact number. The bigger point is that people are starting to notice the artist, and that is how career are built. First, people hear your name, then they hear your song, then they start recognizing your face, then they start looking for your next release, and eventually you move from being an unknown artist to basically somebody people are always watching or want to watch. That is why recognition from an established artist like Conscience can be meaningful. It is not guarantee success, but it can put more eyes on the younger entertainer. And at the end of the day, the young artist still has to deliver, because once the spotlight comes, you have to give people a reason to stay. And this brings me to something I think every young artist in Jamaica needs to understand. One viral song is not necessarily a career. You need a catalog. You need consistency. You need songs that people can come back to. You need performances. You need visuals. And you need personality. And most importantly, you need longevity. So, dancehall has seen countless artists become popular overnight. Some song catch fire, everybody's singing it, everybody's posting it, everybody's dancing to it, and then suddenly 6 months later nobody's talking about it anymore. Why? Because the artist did not build behind the moment. That is where artists like Vybz Kartel, Bounty Killer, Beanie Man, Buju Banton, Mavado, Sean Paul, Alkaline, Popcorn, and many others provide lessons in longevity. Different artists have different stories, different sounds, different careers, but the ones who remain relevant understand that you have to keep creating. You cannot just depend on yesterday it forever. And that is why somebody like Conscience highlights a younger artist. The important question becomes, what does this artist do next? Can he follow one successful release with another? Can he build a recognizable identity? Can he develop a loyal audience? Can he create music that survives beyond social media trends? That is where the real test begins. Now, guys, let's move a bit to a more sensitive part of today's discussion, where we're going to be talking about twins of twins. There has been a public disagreement surrounding why the twins of twins distance themselves. Different versions of events have circulated, and this is where we have to be careful, because when we are discussing allegations involving someone's personal life, especially allegations involving young people, we should not automatically repeat an accusation as though it has been proven. According to Twins of Twins, they gave their explanation for why they ended the association, while the other individual has disputed that explanation and provided his own account. So the responsible way to discuss this is to recognize that there are competing claims. We don't have to decide who is telling the truth. That's what the court is there for. Evidence and credible investigations are for. What we can discuss is the larger lesson. Public figures have to understand that once personal disputes has become public, they can follow everybody involved for years. A disagreement that starts privately can quickly become content for YouTube channels, Instagram pages, TikTok accounts, and entertainment blogs. And once someone enters the public space, controlling the narrative becomes extremely difficult. That is why people in entertainment have to be careful about what they say publicly about other people. And now, guys, we are going to get into the art of today's discussion. Vybz Kartel, the man himself, because Kartel is not simply in his current status, not simple his controversies, but his journey. And this is where the story becomes fascinating, because you only discover Vybz Kartel after he became one of dance's biggest names. You might not understand how difficult the journey actually was. Before the massive hits, before the international recognition, before the Gaza movement, before the major albums, before the controversy, before the prison sentence, sense. There was a young artist who is just trying to figure out how to make his mark. According to Bailey, who was discussing his experience around Kartel, the journey involved a lot of hard work. One of the most fascinating details from the discussion concerns the name Vybz Kartel itself. According to Bailey's account, the name was not necessarily created in the way many fans might assume. Kartel was associated with a group and performed as part of that group. But during performances, there was a practical problem there. When several performers are on stage, calling everybody individually can slow down the performance. So a decision was made to use a name that could represent the group more efficiently, and the name became associated strongly with the young performer we eventually came to know as Vybz Kartel. That is an interesting lesson in branding. Sometimes history is not planned perfectly from day one. Sometimes an opportunity can appear and somebody recognize the opportunity. Kartel apparently understood the importance of the name and eventually turned that identity into a personal brand. A look at what happened afterward. The name Vybz Kartel became bigger than a stage name. It became a brand. It became a movement. It became a recognizable symbol in dancehall. And that is why branding matters. Because if you have talent but nobody remembers your name, you have a problem there. But if your name itself become recognizable and you have something powerful, that is all you need to start off. There were performances where the money was not necessarily there. There were difficult circumstances surrounding his situation. There were moments when artists had to work with what they had, and that's important because sometimes people see the superstar and forget the struggle that came before the superstar. You see the success of Vybz Kartel, you see his expensive lifestyle, you see the massive crowd that is behind him, you see all his hit songs, but you don't see the years of preparation. You don't see the small performances. You don't see the rejected songs. You don't see the people who help you when nobody knew your name. You don't see the nights when you perform without receiving the kind of money you hope for. That is why Bailey's story is interesting. He wasn't simple talking about Kartel as a superstar. He was talking about Kartel before the superstar, and that gives fans another perspective. Another major point um from Bailey's story is the idea that Vybz Kartel was constantly learning. According to his recollection, Kartel was somebody who studied music. He watched what other people are doing and he listened, he wrote, and he does his experiment by himself. He challenged himself, and that creativity eventually became one of the strongest parts of his identity. Bailey compared the environment where Kartel um surround itself resembling a learning institution. Artists came through, people learn, different performers develop their skills, and that is a major part of understanding the rise of the Gaza movement. It was not simple one person making music. There was an ecosystem that was surrounded by him. People were developing, artists were being introduced, collaboration were happening, different personalities were emerging, and Cartel became increasingly central to these environments. This is where we have to separate the music from the controversy because you can discuss someone's musical contribution without pretending every part of their life was perfect because nobody's story is perfect. The point of this particular discussion is to understand the musical journey, and musically the journey was significant. One of the strongest compliments in the entire interview was about Carter's songwriting ability. Bailey described him as somebody whose mind was constantly working, and that is something that become obvious when You look at the sheer amount of music associated with Vybz Kartel. Some artists struggle to finish one song, others can sit down and develop multiple ideas at once. According to Bailey, though, Kartel was one of those people who could work on several ideas simultaneously, and that level of productivity is not easy. Writing is not just simply putting words together, because you need concept, rhythm, melodies, wordplay, and timing. You need an understanding of what the audience wants, and you need the ability to make your lyrics fit the instrumental way. So Cartel became known for constantly experimenting with different rhythms and approaches, and that is part of the reason why his catalog became so large. Whether you personally consider him the greatest dancehall artist or not, the amount of material connected to his career is difficult to ignore. Another important part of what Bailey is saying that is the number of people who play roles in Cartel journey. He mentioned names such as DJ Chris, and this is something young artists need to understand, because nobody builds a successful career completely alone. You may eventually become the superstar, but there were probably people who played the music, people who gave you your first opportunity, people who introduced you to somebody, people who booked you, people who played your record on radio, people who believe in you before everybody else, and the list goes on. But that does not mean everyone who help you will remain a part of your journey forever, because people will move on in different direction eventually. Relationship change, music change, business change, but the early support can still be important. And according to the story being told, DJ Chris was one of those individuals who helped provide opportunities during the early stage, and that is why remembering the journey will always matter. Now, let's go a bit into the influence, because this is where the conversation about Vybz Kartel become much bigger than one artist. You can debate his personality, you can debate his controversies, you can debate his place in dancehall history, but his influence on the sound, the language, the branding, and the business mentality of modern dancehall is a major part of the conversation. Artists who came after him were operating in an industry that Cartel had helped to reshape. He showed that dancehall artists could become a brand. He showed the importance of digital music distribution. He showed the importance of constant releases. He understood controversy. He understood attention. He understood fans' loyalty, and he understood how to make people talk. That does not mean that every strategy should be copied, but from a business and entertainment perspective, there are lessons there to learn from. And this brings us back around to Alkaline, because Alkaline represents another generation of dancehall artists who basically understood the importance of building a strong identity. Alkaline and Vybz Kartel are completely different artists. They have different personalities, they have different sounds, they have different approaches, but there is one thing that they have in common: they understand branding. Vendetta became associated with Alkaline, Gaza became associated with Cartel. Those names became bigger than the individual song. And when an artist can create a movement around the music, that is powerful. That is why conversation about dancehall can not only be about who has the biggest song this week, we also have to talk about legacy. Who created something that people continue talking about years later? Who influence the next generation, who create a recognizable identity, who change how artists approach their careers. Those are much bigger questions to ask. And before Carter generation, you had the giants who also helped build the foundation, who are Bounty Killer, the man himself, and Beenie Man. Their contribution to dancehall cannot simply be erased because another generation came along. Every generation build on the previous generation. So Bounty Killer has his impact, Beenie Man had his impact, Buju Banton had his impact, Sizzla had his impact, Capleton had his impact, Sean Paul carried dancehall to another level internationally, Mavado created his own identity, Popcorn developed into a major international artist, and then you have artists like Alkaline bringing another approach. This is why dancehall history should be viewed like a long story rather than a competition where one chapter automatically destroy another person's. So guys, now we reach one of the most difficult chapter of Cartel journey when he was in prison. Bailey's perspective at this point was not to ignore the difficult parts of Cartel's story. The point was to recognize that even after his legal troubles and imprisonment, the musical influence did not disappear. In fact, during his absence, dancehall continued to evolve. Other artists had opportunities, new sounds became popular, Afrobeat grew internationally, different artists stepped forward, and yet, when Vybz Kartel eventually returned to the public spotlight, the reaction demonstrated that his audience had not simply disappeared. That is something worth analyzing because usually, when an artist disappeared for a long period, maintaining relevance becomes extremely difficult. But Cartel catalog continued to circulate. His name continued appearing in conversation. His music continued being played, and his fans continued identifying themselves with the Gaza movement. That kind of loyalty does not happen overnight. And this is probably the biggest lesson I take from the entire discussion with Bailey. Success does not happen in one day. The public usually see the finished product, but behind the finished product is a long story. So Vybz Kartel did not simply wake up one morning and one of the dancer biggest name. There are people before him, there were performances before him, there were mistakes, there were lessons, there were songs that worked, songs that did not work, people who supported him, people who disagree with him, moment when things went wrong, moment when things went right. That is what makes his journey interesting. And if you are an upcoming artist watching this, don't only look at where somebody is now. Study how they got there. Discipline yourself. Create your own brand. Write your own song. Study how they build an audience. And then take the lessons that apply to your own journey. One of the things I want to emphasize before we close is this. When we're talking about entertainers, controversy can easily become bigger than the music. One argument happen and suddenly that's all anybody talk about. One social media post come out and the entire conversation becomes personal. But if we are discussing someone's musical legacy, we should be able to examine the music separately from the controversy. That is what this discussion is attempting to do. You don't have to agree with Vybz Kartel. You don't have to be a Gaza supporter. You don't have to be a Vendetta supporter either. You don't have to to agree with Alkaline. You don't have to agree with Conscience or any other artist, but you can still analyze what these artists have contributed to the Jamaican music. That is what makes the conversation interesting. So when you put everything together, people, today's discussion really gives us several different stories. We have Alkaline continuing to move according to his own strategy and giving fans another glimpse into his current mindset. We have Conscience who is trying to help the younger artists. We have the ongoing discussion with Twins of Twins. We have the continuing conversation about Vybz Kartel. and his early days, from the performance, the craft, his identity, the emerge of Gaza movement, the building of a massive catalog, from influencing generation of dancehall artists to becoming one of the most discussed names in the Jamaican music. That is a journey. And whether you love him or criticize him, that journey deserves to be studied if you are trying to understand the modern dancehall industry. But that's where we are going to leave this one for today. And I want to hear from you. So leave your thoughts in the comment section. Let's talk in the comments. What did you think about Alkaline latest interview? Do you think Alkaline is now at the stage where he can simply focus on his career without worrying about what everybody else is doing? And let's talk about Vybz Kartel after hearing this history. Do you think people sometimes forget how difficult his journey was? Do you think Kartel influence on dancehall is as significant as many people claim? Drop your thoughts down below. But remember, disagree respectfully. This is music, this is culture, this is Jamaica, and everybody is entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Send this video to somebody who loves dancehall. And let's be positive, let's be respectful, and most importantly, keep supporting Jamaican music. From Bounty Killer, Beanie Man, Vybz Kartel, Movado, Alkaline, Popcorn, Sean Paul, Conscience, and the younger generation coming through. Every generation has played a role in the story. This is Jamaican music, this is dancehall, and the story is still being written. So, be safe. Keep supporting the culture, and I will catch you in the next one.